Welcome to Wake Up with Joni, where ancient wisdom and modern life come together to give you powerful tools to fulfill your highest potential. Each week, we will explore timeless principles that help us live with greater awareness, create healthier relationships, lead lives rooted in purpose, compassion, and freedom. Whether it's a conversation with John, a guest, or a practical reflection from Stop, Look, Choose, I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Today, we're having coffee again with John English, a best-selling author and warrior on the practical Toltec Path of freedom. We left off talking about power and a promise to dive deeper into what's called the 4 practices of power on this segment. So, welcome, John.
It's great to be back with you again, Joni, and to have an opportunity to discuss something that over the last 26 years has added a lot of peace and serenity to my life.
Absolutely. And I began this journey with you on the Warrior's Path almost 9 years ago. And it is something, what we're going to talk about today is a game changer. It is a huge reason that I have so much freedom in my life. So I'm grateful for you in sharing that with me. And I know that part of your mission is just to share practical tools that help people in their lives.
It has brought a lot of joy to my life and a lot of heart-centered energy to be able to share these things with people.
Yay.
That's for sure.
So let's talk about it. What are the 4 practices of power as a group? And then let's break them down.
That sounds like a great idea. In talking about the 4 practices of power, first I always like to remind everyone that we know very little about power, but what we do know is that it can most accurately be described as unconditional love in motion. It is the power of life itself. The 4 practices of power were actually taught to me 26 years ago by Alberto Villoldo of the Four Winds Society in the Medicine Wheel. And there they were referred to as the 4 practices of the South. Now, since the South direction is the direction of power, I refer to them as the 4 practices of power. And they are non-attachment, non-judgment, non-suffering, and beauty.
Yeah, the one at the end feels like a mystery, and I love that we're going to break it down and do each one, because what I found the most motivating to practice those was the promise of the 4th one, of walking in beauty, and we'll talk about what that means. So when you're talking about the 4 practices, the first thing I thought of was Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements. Do they correlate?
Well, they do correlate, and the 4 agreements are awesome. And also, there's a Toltec aphorism that says all of life is 100%, and I do mean 100%, interrelated, interdependent, interconnected, and therefore interactive. So in that way, the 4 agreements are definitely connected to the 4 practices of power.
So just as a reminder, a lot of people out there have read the 4 agreements. I picked that book up in 2014, I think, somewhere around there. And it was a game changer. And it's very simply written. But the 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, and don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. So for those of you out there who have never heard of those, you'll hear them woven into our conversation today.
One thing that you alluded to that I really appreciated is how the 4 practices are a progression, and if you practice the first 3, the first being non-attachment, that then it's much easier to walk in beauty. And that's a way that they're connected to the 4 agreements. If you practice the 4 agreements, then it's much easier to walk in beauty. And walking in beauty is the birthright of every human being. And at the same time, we have to choose it. The 4 practices of power can lead to more consistently walking in beauty. And all of your life changes when you do that. So non-attachment. Non-attachment is the first practice of power. And what that means is to just realize how much expectations you have and how many attachments you have to your home, to your business, to your work, to your relationships. And when we have those attachments, we develop expectations and all kinds of stories surrounding those things. And then when those expectations aren't met, we start trying to maybe control the situation, or we become unhappy because we are attached to particular outcomes. So by practice, also important to remember that these are practices, and they're called practices for a reason, because we want to practice them. We get much better at playing the game of life, like playing any other game, if we practice the 4 practices of power. So non-attachment means non-attachment to everything. And one question that often comes up is about relationships and having attachments to the people that you love. Well, if you do unconditionally love someone, that means there's no attachments to them. So everybody is a free being to make their own choices, their own decisions, and do what they want with their life. One of those, in a relationship, we make a choice to navigate life with these people that we're in relationships with. And as you know from your own experience, non-attachment really opens the door to acceptance, to accepting life on life's terms and being able to flow with the whimsical nature of life.
Yeah. I think of attachment, there are a couple of things here. I think of attachment as attaching to stories about, this is the old me. And sometimes it still pops up, but I have the tools. So attaching to a story about a situation or a person. If I'm attached to thinking something should be a certain way, I'm going to cause my own suffering. And as you've always said, we are literally the ones that cause our suffering. So that ties into not being a victim. When you really get that the way we are thinking, the way I am thinking is what causes the suffering, I can look at, okay, what am I thinking? What is true? Am I attached to a story, an outcome, thinking things should be a certain way or a different way? We've had many opportunities over the last lifetime, but certainly since 2020, to be victims of what's going on in the world. And not attaching to something means that I'm not wrapped around the axle, that I'm not thinking things should be, don't should on yourself, a certain way. So the attachment piece, it's interesting because I just really like to point out for people who are familiar with the 4 agreements, don't take anything personally or don't make assumptions. If I'm making assumptions, then I'm attached to something. So how do people define for themselves what attachments are, identify what they are in their lives, and then how do they get rid of them or ameliorate them?
Well, suffering is, if there's some form of suffering, that's usually an indication that we have an attachment or a judgment, the second practice. So what I look at the big context of life, and all of life is about growth. It's about moving, expanding, and creating more. It's all about growth and expansion. And when we have an attachment to an outcome or to the way that a story we have made up that this is the way it should be, then what happens is we really can't see. And if we really can't see, then we can't clearly identify, or it's super difficult to clearly identify what growth is trying to happen here. So the first key is to identify their suffering. Is it a story? Is it an attachment to an outcome? What form of an attachment is it? And then just make a decision using your will that you're going to let go and accept life on life's terms and let the outcome be the outcome. So that's where the four agreements can come in, because one of the four agreements is always do your best. And if you stop to contemplate it, really all that you can do is show up fully and do your best. And your best today is better than your best last week, and your best last week was better than your best a year ago. So if you just show up fully, one of the four agreements, and always do your best, another of the four agreements, then let the outcome be the outcome and accept it as it is. And what you'll find is that your perception will open up, and it's so much easier to make better decisions when you're moving from point A to point B.
So what is the difference between connection and attachment?
Well, an attachment is not about unconditional love. We are connected to everyone and everything through the power that is our perception, which we'll have to talk about in a future episode, and through our awareness. There's no escaping that. That's just the way life operates. It's all interconnected and interactive. So the difference between an attachment is that I'm focused, I'm worrying, contemplating, I'm constantly turning it over and over again on some particular outcome, as opposed to just showing up fully in my power, which is unconditional love and motion, and doing my best.
Can you tell a story that illustrates that?
Yes, I can. Quite some time ago, I set out to create a spiritually based social media site that would feature all of this work, all of the things that I had learned. And I worked on this and spent a lot of resources, a lot of my most precious resource, time, for probably almost 4 years. And every step of the way, I ran into roadblocks. And I thought that I just had to focus and work harder, because that's how I ended up becoming an author and a healer. But as I look back on it, when I became an author and a healer, or worked as an alternative healer, everything just fell into place. Every time there was a challenge, I broke through the challenge. Well, I became attached to the story and the outcome of this spiritual social media site, and spent all of this time working on it. And because of the attachment, I was unable to identify that what was really going on is my real self was not at all interested in creating this spiritual social media site. And my physical self, my human self, was ignoring the signs of this and thinking that I just had to work harder and break through all these challenges. Finally, after quite a while of working on this, as I mentioned, I decided to just let it go. That was probably the longest attachment that I've had since I learned about the four practices of power. I was stubborn on that one, and I did not give up, which is also an example of how a great character trait can become a character flaw. Eventually, I just let go, and a whole new world opened up, and it was coaching. And I went into coaching, and it completely turned my life and my business around.
Wonderful. If you could just take a moment to define or talk about the real self, what is that?
I think to touch on it now, and then this would probably be
another episode.
Another good topic for a different episode. You have our real self. Every tradition speaks about the soul or the spirit or the real human being in one form or another. Generally speaking, I refer to it as the real self. My favorite term for it is from the Toltec teachings, and they refer to your real self as your dreamer, which always reminds me that this is a dream. And then you have your ego self, which is necessary to navigate life on the physical plane, as long as the ego self needs to be in check. So you have your real self, the self that created this lifetime on planet Earth, and then you have your physical, emotional, mental self and ego self that is on the physical plane. And when you really learn, when you really get non-attachment as a practice of power, the physical, mental, emotional, and ego self are in check and controlled by the real or spiritual self.
Got it. Okay. So anything else on non-attachment before we move on to the next power?
I think that's just a reminder that it's a practice. And give it a try and see the next time that you've discovered you're suffering due to some form of attachment, just really set your mind and your heart on letting it go and just showing up fully and doing your best. And whatever outcome is the outcome, and see how much peace that brings you, and then practice acceptance and just keep on practicing it.
And it occurs to me that a person listening might begin to think, oh, I'm attached to this, I'm attached to that. What if they made a list of what they are consciously aware of now that they know what attachment is and that it brings them suffering? They made a list of the attachments. Then what? What would you recommend as a teacher?
That's a great question and a great way to do it. I really love using lists. So you make a list of your attachments, and then with each one, you ask the question, what do I need to do to accept that as it is now? And then the second question is, what do I need to do to just show up fully and do my best and release the attachment?
Perfect.
That's what I would do with each item on the list, and then take notes.
Yeah. Good. And revisit them.
Yes.
Okay. Shall we move on to non-judgment?
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, as humans, we can all relate to that one.
We sure can.
What does that mean?
Judgment is grounded in ego. And it is the epitome of arrogance. Because unless you can see the result of any situation or choice or impact of anything as it moves throughout the totality of time, then you don't know if it's a good or bad thing. That's why all of the masters have said, don't judge. Because you can't know if something is good or it is bad until you see its impact throughout the totality of time. So we want to discard that level of arrogance and move into the peace and joy of realizing that you really don't know. And there are situations in our life, there are actions and the doings of others that take place, and really the only question is, how do I use discernment to act upon that, to determine what I want in my life, and doing so without judging the person or the action?
What's fascinating is that as you're speaking, I connect non-judgment would really help non-attachment.
They are definitely interconnected and interactive, for sure.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about discernment, because that's a really important concept.
Discernment is a power, actually, and it resides at the level of rational thinking, which resides at the level of your real self or dreamer. It is a great gift to the incarnation on the physical plane. And discernment just simply means the ability to choose. And to choose according to the way the warrior operates, which is to uplift all of life. So is something life affirmative, and is it uplifting to life? And to make your choices in your life, which is going to make your life so much easier based on that foundation. It's just incredible the difference that can make. So there is the doing of another. That's the way a Toltec would refer to it. It's the actions of others. And you observe that action and you discern if that is something you want, yes or no, in your life. And you choose then how you're going to operate.
I think this is such a huge concept, and I wanted you to pull some threads on it because it was incredibly empowering for me when we had this conversation multiple years ago. You said to me, I'm just wondering, why are you spending time with this person? And I said, well, I want to have friends. And he said, but is this person adding to your life? Is this person uplifting you? Is it a two-way street? And I paused and I said, no. And you said, well, there's this word called discernment. And I'm now paraphrasing, but I would invite you to be discerning in how you spend your life energy and with whom. Really look at why. And it was very, very helpful for me. I mean, I moved around my whole life as a child. I had 21 different homes and 16 different schools by the time I was 20 years old. So I was constantly being a chameleon and being what I thought they wanted me to be so that I could have friends. And that was a pattern that went through my entire life. Plus, I'm a Libra, so it's all balance and all the things. So learning that I, as a human being, can discern who, what, and why I want whatever it is in my life was incredibly powerful. So thank you for taking a minute there.
You're welcome. The human being is group conscious, and really at its core a loving being, and as a result is deathly afraid of the ego, whether they are conscious of it or not. They know that the ego causes, in its self-importance, cause so many problems that even unconsciously they will bend over backwards to avoid things of the ego. So what they end up doing is ending up in relationships that are not in balance with the great gift of life. And as a result, they stay in relationships, any type of relationship, where they are not being uplifted as life should be uplifted, and they are only uplifting the other person. And so there's not a balance there. There's a Quechua word for this that is aini, which means perfect reciprocity. So in every area of our lives, we are out of balance if we are not loving and uplifting ourselves as much as we love and uplift others. That's the way life set it up. So discernment is about really getting honest with yourself and looking at these relationships and owning, realizing that you are every bit as much as important as anyone else. There's a Toltec aphorism that says, within the great gift of life, all are equal. So if you stay in relationships like that, you are not living according to that aphorism.
So that's the discernment piece. I also want to pull a thread on, since we're on non-judgment that moved into discernment, going back to non-judgment, what I have found is there's a motivation for judging other people. The motivation is
the need to be
oftentimes
right.
about, yes, being
Okay,
right,
yeah.
or feeling superior, which is usually because they feel inferior. Can you speak to those?
Yeah, so the need to be right is hardwired in the biology and therefore the DNA of the human being. And that is due to survival. Because if you were wrong 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, it meant your life was on the line. Mm-hmm. And it still does to some extent today, but not so much in our modern world. What happened is the ego took a hold of that and just turned it into that we have to be right. Then we're in duality, universal law of polarity. Then we're in duality, and if we're right, then someone else has to be wrong.
Right, which elevates us incorrectly.
But elevates us against the other person. So one way to avoid the attachments, so this is connected to non-attachment, is if you find yourself really needing to be right, and you're all wrapped around the axle about this and chewing on it mentally and getting all emotional about it, then just release the need to be right. It's not necessary. It's one of those funny quirks of human nature that has gone ballistic, bananas, and it's connected to the survival mechanism.
Yeah, and it can be found anywhere, whether it's a boss and an employee, a husband and wife, oftentimes
A country.
The pickleball court.
Yep.
Being right about the score. It's hilarious. So I was having a conversation with a dear friend yesterday. We were working out, and she said, "You're right." And I said, "I know, I'm right a lot." She started laughing because we both know it is something that's come up a few times. I don't need to be right anymore. I used to need to be right somehow to justify my existence, somehow to feel important, somehow whatever. And now when I hear that, I'm like, tee.
Well, say a little bit about what releasing the need to be right, what that's brought into your life.
Oh, man. So it's removed 90% of conflict. Not needing to be right means I can hear the other person, and I can honor that that person may not agree with me, or they may have a different opinion or a way of doing things, because you and I are very different, for example. You're very systematic. You were once a tool maker. Everything has a system and a place and a thing, and don't leave the spoon on the counter. And I'm a very different human being, but we've learned to work with each other. And one of the things is letting go of needing to be right. I don't suffer because of that.
For sure's.
Okay, so anything else on non-judgment?
I would say just realizing, wow, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. One of the reasons the master said God alone can judge is because what they meant by that is that only the one spirit can see the result of any one thing as it plays out through the totality of time.
And the different timelines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the human ego turned that into God being a judge, which was not at all meant by that. But just contemplate how much peace and serenity, how much crap you can let go of. If you just contemplate that and just realize that you can do it. And then remember that it's a practice. Mm-hmm. Non-attachment and non-judgment about everything. And then use discernment to choose what you want in your life.
Yes. Okay, I think this is a good place to move on to non-suffering. What do you think?
Sounds like a good idea.
All right. Talk to me about that.
Again, back to Alberto. Alberto is the one who brought into my world and taught me that pain is inevitable, suffering is completely optional. And if what we find is if we practice non-attachment and we practice non-judgment, then there is a lot less suffering in our lives. Life on the physical plane is full of its ups and downs, curveballs, bumps, and bruises. And as a result, if we use all of those experiences to grow and to expand, as opposed to becoming more of a narrow-minded person, then we'll find that there will be much less suffering. So suffering is also an indicator that there's probably some form of attachment or judgment. And with all experiences, and I got this from Ray Dalio, with all experiences we can ask, what is real? What do I want? What am I going to do about it? What is real? What do I want? What am I going to do about it? And thereby eliminate a lot of suffering in our lives. I really appreciate non-suffering. And one of the things I like to tell people is that, hey, I'm a wimp. I don't want to suffer at all. So whenever there is suffering, I am on the hunt, as a Toltec would say, to find out what is the cause of that suffering so that I can use one of the other tools to eliminate it from my life.
Which indicates non-judgment about the suffering. It's like, I am suffering. Where is this coming from? And what do I need to do? Not, I'm a bad person, I shouldn't be suffering, but what is going on and where do I need to go with this?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So can you talk about, there's a difference between discomfort, speed bumps in life. Things, as you said, are going to happen. Things will arise and they are opportunities to learn, right?
Exactly.
As opposed to non-suffering. So I just answered my own question, but could you pull some threads on that?
So suffering, so let's say we have physical pain. Let's say thank you for helping me through this, but when I blew out my knee skiing, that was super painful. Mm-hmm. The suffering aspect will I ever be able to ski again? Will I be able to walk right? Will the knee heal? And on it goes. That's the suffering piece. Letting the pain go with a groan or whatever is a way to practice non-suffering as opposed to constantly complaining about it. Discussing something that's going on with you in your life does help you get to the root cause. It's a great way to get to the root cause, and it does help you release the energy of your suffering or of your pain, let's say. It helps you release the energy of your pain. At the same time, we want to be careful not to going into complaining, because if we go into complaining, then we're victim, and then we're suffering. So what I found is that of all the people that I've introduced these to, the human being is a mental and emotional being. They are a thinking and a feeling being. And the logical side of them can grasp a hold of the 4 practices of power and say, this makes sense. And then not long after, they can feel what their life would be like if they used the 4 practices. And that's what usually sets them right on the path of getting going with implementing them in their lives.
Yeah. What I love is you were talking about discussing things, talking about things out loud, navigating the unknown basically without judgment, without complaint necessarily. Or I could say, okay, I'm just going to complain here for a minute. Yeah. I'm aware that I'm complaining, so I just want to get it outside of myself. But to look at this stuff with curiosity, which means non-judgment, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Anything more on that?
You touched on something that we touch on in the Warriors training, and it's an actual tool. And every human being has what the Toltecs call a luminous cocoon. Other people refer to it as a luminous field. And that field is full of energy. And when we have a situation in our lives that is a big challenge to us, our field is full of that energy, including all of our thoughts, our mentation about it, all of our emotions about it. And when we speak about it out loud to someone else or something else, then what happens is we are using the power of sound to release that from our luminous field. And when we do that, then we're able to see clearly and be able to identify what it is that we're trying to create in our life, how we're trying to grow. And one thing that fascinates me about the Toltec teachings is that they knew about this tens of thousands of years ago. And it is actually what gave birth to what people in the modern day call therapy.
Okay. Well, I'm sure people have begun to put together how non-attachment, non-judgment, and non-suffering, which are interactive, can lead to walking in beauty. So shall we move on?
Yes, let's move on. I
Okay.
love walking in beauty.
Okay, based on that foundation, what does that mean and how do they do it?
Walking in beauty is to be in love and have respect for the great gift of life. And now, the great gift of life on the physical plane. And to have the beauty and joy of humility that you are a part of this magnificent whole. And that whole would not be the same without you. And that life is this infinite mystery that you are here to explore and be a part of. And that you can be an individuation of the one spirit and the one life and experience the life on the physical plane as the one spirit and the one life. That would be the ultimate experience of the human being. It is the destiny that we all have in common. And damn, it just makes your life a lot more enjoyable and a lot more of what everybody says they want out of life. So the non-attachment, non-judgment, non-suffering, and the four agreements are what pave the way to walking in beauty. And we can also use it as one of the foundational triggers like suffering. If we're not in that space, the first thing we want to do is go on the hunt to find out what we need to shift, and it always has to do with our perception, to get back into that space.
Thank you for that. I think that's the perfect place to bring our coffee conversation to a close. It occurs to me that a great episode, maybe the next one, we should do the four agreements.
That would be, I love that idea. That would be really, I think, helpful for people. Let's do that.
Okay, so our next coffee conversation will be on the four agreements and breaking those down. I always ask the last question, in regard to what we've spoken about today. How do you recommend that the listener go out and live their most alive life?
I would say just dare to believe. And dare to open up that perhaps you are so much more than you ever dared to dream about. And that it is your birthright to walk in beauty in this life experience as a creator and an individuation of the creative force, that whatever you want to call it, and that it would not be the same without you.
So important. Thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And if you're ready to go deeper, we would love to walk with you. John and I have a new workshop October 8th, 2026 called The Warrior's Gate 1, Seeing the Dream. It's here at Paradise Ranch Retreat, or a new feature. You can take the course online from the comfort of your own home. So, we would love to walk alongside you. For information on that or coaching with us, go to paradiseranchretreat.com for more information. Until next time, beautiful humans, it's your turn to go out and live your most alive life.